A fella that I used to read back in the days before I was forced to do certain things in school. I used to do a lot of reading in our Christian faith, and some of that reading had led to a fella who had talked about a time when they were teaching a Sunday school class to the kids, and they were talking about Easter. And the pastor had given him a whole bunch of information, and then he said back to the kids, what were the first words that Jesus said to his disciples when they saw him after the resurrection? And one little girl excitedly raised her hand, and he said, what did he say? And she said, ta-da! I wonder if it was that kind of feeling when they first saw Christ. When they came to the tomb, I'm not going to drink that water. I keep going for it, but I'm not going to drink it. It's time to get to work. So, many times we come into the faith, or maybe you came to church today and you had some sort of an expectation. There was something that you wanted, maybe from God, maybe from yourself, maybe a change in your life, maybe to follow through with something that you had promised. But when you come to the Easter celebration, sometimes we can get caught up in all the noise. Sometimes we can get caught up in all of the colors and the flowers and the nice tie that I'm wearing today. Thank you for the compliments, by the way. But what were your expectations today? Because when Mary and the women came to the tomb, they had something on their mind. Maybe it was disappointment. Maybe they were downcast. Maybe they were depressed. But for some reason, maybe it was tradition, and probably so. Maybe it was what they did on that day. But in their heart of hearts, they were still coming to Jesus and offering a service and a sacrifice to their Lord, their master and their teacher. Now, God didn't disappoint that day. When they had got there, what does it say? And you can say it out loud. What did they see? Ta-da! Was there still a stone? Was it rolled away? Think about it. A lot has happened. So the title of this message this morning, and Jaka was all over me about, get this message in. I need a title. And I said, here you go. It's Surprise. Could you imagine what their expectations were? But what had changed? They had gone there, and what have you done with my Lord? And two people show up, and they're angels, and one is just dazzling bright. I mean, as light and bright as you can be. Brighter than the lights here. Brighter than the white behind me. Bright as can be, and they fell on their faces. And they asked the same thing that I asked at the cemetery this morning. Why do you seek the living among the dead? Did you listen to his words? Did he not say? And the angels give them a little clue to a Bible study. Now, let's take a look here. We hear, and Sally, thank you for reading so well. Thank you. We have these two walking to Emmaus, and their expectations have been crushed over the Passion Week. Their Lord is crucified, and now they don't know what's going on because they hear that Christ is no longer there. So they're walking along the road, and Jesus, as he seems to do from time to time, especially after the resurrection, walks up alongside of them. But they don't recognize him at first, and he begins to talk to them, and they ask him, have you not been around Jerusalem? How could you be the only one that doesn't know what happened this week? And Jesus said, tell me about it. So they tell him about it, and I think Jesus wanted them to say what really happened. And they said that our master, our teacher, was crucified and so forth. But they never got down to the nitty-gritty. They only went halfway. And the greatest Bible study, I believe, in the history of the world happened in that moment. It says that Jesus started with them without revealing himself. But in his word, started from Moses, went through the prophets, went through the Psalms, and showed them everything that they had missed. Even though they studied it their whole life, even though they were there their whole life in class, in Sunday school, with the teachers, but they only knew half of the gospel. D.L. Moody back in the day used to teach students, and sometimes he would get them out and have them preach in the streets or preach at churches. That was part of their class requirement. And every now and again he would show up, and he would never tell them he was going to be there. And the young man who was preaching preached away, and his words were eloquent. He was right on, and he preached the cross of Jesus Christ and the need for sinful man to have Christ come on their behalf and pay it all. But at the end of it, he went over to the young man and he said, "You made a mistake." And he said, "What?" He said, "You said, come back tomorrow and I will teach on the resurrection of Jesus Christ." He said, D.L. Moody says, "You only gave half of the gospel." Michelangelo, back in the day, he had went into the art galleries and he saw all these depictions of Jesus Christ being crucified. And rightfully so. It's a part of our faith. It's meaningful for every soul. But he said, "You guys keep putting out the same artwork. And though it is meaningful, you're only putting out half of the gospel. You're still not putting out the whole story." D.L. Moody says you need to preach the resurrection. Michelangelo said, you need to preach the resurrection. Jesus Christ said, would he not rise on the third day? He preaches to those walking to Emmaus and says, did he not say? The angels say, did he not say? And too many times we go to church for just an hour in a week and we miss the rest of the gospel in our lives. Let's read something here to you. I'd like to read to you a poem with a lot of power in it. Some of us stay at the cross, and rightfully so. Some of us wait at the tomb, quickened and raised with Christ, yet lingering still in the gloom. Some of us bide at the Passover feast, with Pentecost still unknown. The triumphs of grace in the heavenly place that our Lord has made known. If the Christ who died had stopped at the cross, his work had been incomplete. If the Christ who was buried stayed in the tomb, then he would have only known defeat. But the way of the cross never stops at the cross. And the way of the tomb leads on to the victorious grace in the heavenly place where the risen Lord has gone to prepare a place for you and me. The resurrection is more than being about Christ rising from the dead. Christ paid the price for us on Calvary at Golgotha, took the weight of mankind's sin upon himself, and suffered on our behalf, the just for the unjust. But on the third day, no matter what their expectations were, fulfilling his word just as he said, he rose on the third day. And you know, I was studying the scriptures yesterday, and a lot of times we read that the angel rolled the stone away. But that's not how it seems to have happened in the scriptures. The angel did roll the stone away, but he was already not in there. Did you catch that when you read it? Christ had already been gone. When he comes to see the disciples in the upper room, the doors were locked, yet Christ appears with them. And he says, do you have anything to eat? And they give him something to eat, and he does. Now pay close attention to this, because it is a revealing of what is to come for those who have passed on in this world now. There is a glorified body that happens with resurrection in Jesus Christ. Resurrection power that raised Jesus from the dead and gave him a body that can eat, but also is not contained by time and space, is also a glorified body that is a promise by Christ for those to come. So much so that his work shows it. He said it in his word. He proved it in his work. Now, there was a fellow who was trying to cross the border in Europe some time ago. Now, it was back in the days before you didn't have to have real ID. Anybody got one of those yet?
Yeah, I do.
Way ahead of me. He goes to the border and he says, I'm so-and-so. And so they say, well, we can't prove it's you. You forgot your passport at home. And, you know, your voice sounds like it. The things that you say sound like this guy. But how will we know if you're really this famous artist? And one of the guards took a tablet and a paper and he said, draw that over there. And it was a whole bunch of people standing off to the side in the station. And he drew it all so quickly and so fast and with such skill that his word matched his work, and they let him through. Jesus gave them the Bible study of a lifetime. The angel reminded them of those same words, and his work confirmed every single thing that God had promised to his people. But do you believe it today? I like poems, and you know it. If you're on my social media page, you see from time to time I dabble in my own stuff. Tomb shall not hold him any longer. Death is strong, but Christ is stronger. Stronger than the deepest dark, his is holy light. Stronger than all the wrong is his righteous might. Now, faith and hope triumphantly say, this is because Christ is risen on Easter Day. You remember back in the 80s, Geraldo Rivera had his own show. You remember that?
Yes.
What was that called? Was it the Geraldo Rivera show? Anyhow, he did this thing, and I was reading one of these little stories yesterday, and I remembered it because I was a boy at the time. I was young. And at the time, there was this thing that he did. He went to Chicago. They went to this hotel, and they advertised it all the week. Do you remember? They were going to Al Capone's vault. Has anybody watched that? They go to the vault, and they are expecting something when they get to the vault. They advertise it all over television, and folks are really excited. And I was, 12, 14 at the time, glued to the television when they opened the vault. Even the IRS was there to collect the $800,000 in past taxes he didn't pay. They came with an expectation of something more. Now, the vault ended up being empty, right? Mm-hmm. Now, Jesus Christ, when you came to his tomb, when you came as a disciple, when the women came to him, he spoke to Peter. He spoke to Mary. And the first person that heard the words of Jesus Christ, the first person he confirmed his rising to, was a woman who had been delivered from a life that many of us would say that we try to avoid. And it took one word, Jesus calling her name, Mary. And she knew in that word who was standing before her. She says, teacher. And she holds on to him. Peter, fishing on the side of the lake, they're in a bunch of blessing. They caught a ton of fish. But somehow somebody calls from the shore, and Peter hears the voice of Jesus Christ, not able to see who he is. And the moment he heard his voice and heard called out to him, he says, it is the Lord. And he jumps in, leaves all of those fish behind, and swims towards his master. Easter. The cross, all of it is a part of a gospel message that says God so loved the world that he gave his only begotten Son, that whosoever would place their trust in him shall not die but have life everlasting. For God did not send his Son into the world to condemn the world, but to live through him. And on the third day, that promise that he had made to so many, for those who will receive him, he gave them the right not only to be called the children of God, but to exist in his presence in a beautiful relational way forever. I like sunrise service not because you guys want to get me up early, not because it's frigid cold and my hands, I can't move them when I leave. I like sunrise service because it reminds me of that day when I will see all of my loved ones again. When I will see my grandfather, when I will see my best friend, when I will see my family members and those who have gone on before me, because the empty tomb is part of it. But Christ gave us lots of examples afterwards of what we would see. Do you believe it today? So I'll ask you again. Christ is risen, and what is your response? Amen. God bless you. God bless you. I'd like you to keep that in mind as you go throughout the day. Please give thanks to the Lord, for he is good and his love endures forever. Would you turn in your hymnals with me to page 310? Now, this is a favorite of many of our church members, but it also confirms a promise we've heard in the Word. Will you rise with me as you're able, and let's sing, He Lives Together.